So, firstly, I want to qualify that Bitcoin is still an experiment at the earliest stages. And whatever fundamental utility or use case that you might think Bitcoin has, the price or the value of a Bitcoin is still probably 80% driven by sentiment, speculation, trading, as opposed to its utility as a currency. It's just not mature.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Taka Talks. Today we have with us a very special guest, Khalid Howladar. Am I saying your name right? I'm so sorry if I
Yeah, no,
Say it for me.
yes, perfect.
Okay.
Howladar, yeah.
Howladar. Okay, Khalid Howladar. Khalid is a distinguished finance professional with expertise in credit risk ratings, MENA securitization, sukuk finance. It's a very long list, so I won't go through all of it. He currently serves as senior managing director at RJ Flemings and Company from the UK/UAE. He's heading the credit and sukuk advisory business. Khalid is also an active partner at Acreditus, focusing on angel investing and advisory services. Now, very importantly, and this is how I mainly know Khalid, he chairs Marhaba DeFi, which is a platform that drives ethical Halal DeFi solutions. And he has a bunch of other things on his CV that if I go on, we might just spend another 10 minutes talking about his CV. I know Khalid as the guy who talks about lots of very important financial issues and uncovers the truth about the financial system on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of his from that perspective because I consume his content a lot. I've also met Khalid once, and all around general nice guy. And so Khalid, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Look, I think what's probably interesting to the audience is a bit my journey. So up until 6 years ago, I have a very conventional, pretty straightforward background. I'm the child of immigrants to the UK. Alhamdulillah, the UK has treated me very well and done very well. Education, meritocracy, values, a lot of fantastic things. Born and raised in London. Moved to Dubai now about 15 years ago to help open the office for Moody's, the global rating agency. But yeah, you're talking about sort of financial system, banks, credit. I was head of Middle East banks. At Moody's, my last position, I was global head of Islamic Finance. And that was interesting because I had these non-Islamic bosses. My first experience, they put this sukuk offering circular on my table. It was 600 pages. And the global head of corporate finance says, look, we've had this sukuk, Nakhil sukuk. We have no idea what this is. Do you mind taking a look? And he wasn't even my boss. He was like a different team. And in those days, Dubai was about to boom. And I looked through this sukuk, 600 pages. And in the end, I told him it's like a bond. He said, what do you mean it's like a bond? A bond is 30 pages. This is 600. And I said, no, in Islam, you have asset-backed finance and you have profit sharing and all these features, but it's a very complex structure. So my first experience with Islamic finance wasn't necessarily, I would say, a positive one. It was very overcomplicated. And this concept of replication is what I discovered. Fast forward, head of Middle East banks, including Islamic, global head of Islamic. But then 6 years ago, I decided to take a step, I guess, relatively late, to set up my own firm, Acreditus, and with some partners. And that's kind of old world stuff, financial services, credit ratings, this type of stuff. But at the same time, and this is where my journey perhaps to the darker side or the more seditious side or my awakening begins, I started investing in startups with a favor for a bit of the Islamic economy. So my first was actually halal food, of all things. Halal ready-to-eat meals company that was getting food into disaster areas. Because I'm too heavily into finance, let me diversify. So since then, I've probably invested in about 12 startups. I now more recently taken LP positions in funds. I don't have the bandwidth or the time to focus because it's not a good strategy. I tend to go deep rather than wide, and you can't go deep into very many companies, and then you get spread thin, and it just doesn't. It's crazy. Add on to that some kids and a family and everything, and everything starts to blow up. Yeah, and as you've highlighted, my most recent sort of passion, my awakening has been through Marhaba DeFi. Beyond holding Bitcoin and Ethereum, I had relatively little exposure to sort of crypto and DeFi. I met the team, really, ethical people, probably half my age, but talented, smart. And even though I tried to learn about crypto, reading books and things, you don't learn so much by reading. And the Marhaba DeFi team, Nakib, Denny's, these guys, they're like my academy. I learned so much from those guys, and it's also led to a bit of an awakening that you might have seen on LinkedIn. Um, uh, I never, until Bitcoin, I never questioned necessarily the role of money or what money is. And then looking at Bitcoin, the two books, the Bitcoin Standard, the Fiat Standard, by Saifuddin, almost like really mind exploding books. They opened me up to the sort of more intellectual side, but through the team at Marhaba is where I met the sort of personal side, the people in crypto. Why are they doing this? What are they doing it for? And then when you mix halal, ethical, and crypto, you get a new animal, because crypto and ethics don't necessarily go together very well. Fraud, insider trading, dealing. There's so many ways to lose money. You have to be careful.
Yeah, before we go into that, let's backtrack a little bit. So I want to understand. You like in the belly of the beast, literally. You have this beautiful job, making tons of money, working for the corporate banking system. You're a product of the system somehow, and the way you be brought up and everything. Tell me, when did you get this bug and like, hey, there's something in this matrix not working perfectly, there's something happening? When did you start like challenging this kind of, hey, I gotta do something that like 360 degree and redefine how I want to use my next 25 years, 30 years of my life and contribute? So go back a little. I want to hear maybe a small story that got you.
We'll be right back after the break.
Tekka Talks brings you stories from around the world that will help you understand how crypto and Islamic finance can change our lives for the better. Subscribe and follow us to keep learning.
You're right when you say that you ask juicy questions, Murad. Yeah, you're right. Look, I was head of Middle East banks. I was global head of Islamic, etc., etc. But the higher up I got within corporations, I would say the more challenging things become in terms of, let's say, politics, ideas, these sorts of things. And as you may have noticed, I'm not particularly good at keeping my mouth shut. And I like to express opinions. I like to give my views. I detest the sort of yes man or yes person mentality. And in a corporate hierarchy, that type of call it behavior or personality, it's great if you're at the very top, but in some organizations maybe it's rewarded, in others perhaps not so much. So and also something had just sort of happened. Brexit had happened, Trump had happened, and I was starting to become aware that, look, the world is not as rosy as it seems. And so a combination of the global environment, challenges emerging, people, for lack of a better word, sort of suffering because of financial considerations, plus a personal angle where, call it my personality, call it my ego, or whatever you want, call it my ideas. I just kind of felt I can take a risk, right? I was relatively in those days more liquid, and I thought, look, I can spend the rest of my life in a corporate and carry on going up, and alhamdulillah, I'll probably do okay. But let me take a risk. And it's not the same thing as other people taking a risk, in the sense that, some people, their livelihoods might depend on it. But as an older person, I had saved money. I'm in a relatively comfortable position versus other people who may be struggling. For other people, it's about survival, potentially, to set up your own business and to get out of the system. Maybe you don't have the academic opportunities that I had of going to top universities and top jobs. A lot of people don't have that. So a startup is a survival. For me, it was more of an experimentation, a passion, a risk that I was willing to take. And if it didn't work out, you know what, worst case, I go back to corporate life. Other people don't have that option. But 6 years later, it's kind of working up and down, left and right. If you'd asked me 6 years ago what I would be doing, and you asked me to create a business plan, that business plan, it went into the bin a long time ago. Flexibility is the name of the game. You just have to identify your strengths, identify what the product market fit is. You're the product. There's a market, and where do you fit? You just have to keep moving around and work out where people want you, and ideally you have something of value. So a long answer to a very short question.
I want to add up something. I mean, since you are very well, well thought, you read a lot. I mean, you LinkedIn post usually. I'm dyslexic, so you they're too long for me. So make it short, please, for me. Make it easy on my brain. So I don't pass the 6-7 line usually. I got the juice at the 6th level, and then the rest I'm like, okay, that's too deep. In the context of where we are today, we're talking now about new technology. You see some country blocking blockchain, crypto, like, normally the leader of the world, namely America, were like very in forefront of technology. Whatever was something new coming up, they were willing to regulate it in a very simple manners fast. Now we see the first drawback. They are kind of not willing yet, I would say, to step in. Obviously, everybody understands there's a fear of the de-dollarization and all these kind of things happening. Again, when we look at the event of today, we see two blocks finally emerging. We used to have the G7, which technically I'm part of it as being French by birth. And you have this emergence of the BRICS, which were pretty much useless before the war of Russian war started. That's where they start to make more sense who they were. But myself, as Muslim from the West, I would say, and now living in the Middle East, I'm still confused. There were one block that was like America, British, France, Italy, which I don't really identify with just as a citizen fakat. And another block, the Brazilian, Chinese, Russian, India, still all non-Muslim country. So being the 1.3 billion nation in the world, we had to wait the second turn to get accepted, and they even didn't took my country of origin, Algeria, in it. Why are we like so cheap? I'm still wonder why there is no 3 blocks at this point. So I want to understand what's happening here. So 2 blocks, not a single Muslim country above them. Do we really exist? I mean, are we really on the same planet, or I'm getting it all wrong? I just want to understand what is happening. If it's not happening at the state level, as regular dudes, Muslim, can we do something about it?
You're going to get me into trouble, Murad, if I speak my mind.
No, no.
Uh,
I don't want, I mean, we don't need to be too much into trouble. I just wake up this morning, I was realizing, I even say I bunched to, I'm like, what happened with those letters, you know?
If we go back a bit, if you look at this concept of mature and emerging markets, and mature markets are all the let's say, or not the the European powers, the American powers, etc. These guys who collectively at one point, I think, controlled 75% of the Earth's surface. After the Second World War, a lot of countries gained their independence, but the financial system, the power structures in play, World Bank, IMF, the US dollar as the world's reserve currency, that's when you had this new world order, let's say. And that's where money fundamentally comes into the picture. And apart from the Soviet Union, there was no counterbalance. Soviet Union collapsed. Communism, a 60-year experiment, a complete failure. Capitalism seemed to win, but the capitalism that we are practicing is not true capitalism. It's kind of crony capitalism. So it's also failing. But now, as the global south, as they sort of call it, these emerging market countries are growing in wealth. They're growing in stature. They're saying we want to have our own voice, etc. Now you're seeing this divergence emerge, where I would say the old emerging market nations want to have their own say and their own sovereignty. And maybe that involves the dollar and maybe it doesn't. Now, to your question as to where to the 1.3 billion Muslims come in, look, I think probably most people identify in terms of their communities, maybe the nation state before their faith. So does someone in Algeria versus somebody in Saudi versus somebody in Indonesia, would they ally themselves with somebody from their own country first or somebody from their own religion? It's not that clear cut that you can define this billion plus community. Yes, we are unified by faith and values, and maybe that's becoming more important in the model world, but the nation state is kind of the main actor as to how these things get done, and the nation state is more driven by the government, the monarchy, etc. So we are still divided, and this is where technology can play a role. The cliche of borderless, borderless economies, borderless finance, borderless commerce. I think blockchain makes that a reality. We don't need to go through divided nations or divided intermediaries. And the main use case, blockchain has been celebrated for many things, but I think the killer use case for blockchain is decentralization and decentralized finance. The ability to have communities financing each other, trading with each other, selling goods and services with each other via tokenization on a network where I don't need to know you, I don't need to trust you, but the protocol takes care of the trust aspect of settlement, transfer, etc. It's massively empowering, and a lot of the problems that you highlight stem from centralization, in my view. So blockchain.
Khalid, I want you to zero in on this idea. We all grew up, and I think maybe since the 50s, everyone born after the 50s, we grew up with the idea that money is something that is created by the government and controlled by the government. And even from the Islamic point of view, from the Muslim scholars who look at Bitcoin, one of the first reasons why they said it was not permissible was because they were saying, who controls this? This needs to be controlled by the state. And if it's not controlled by the state, it's not permissible. How are you now telling us that money, Bitcoin, should be something that is decentralized? Try to take us out of our frame of mind and explain to us how this can be.
We'll be right back after the break.
We believe that the financial system is broken and that our banks and insurance companies don't have our best interests at heart. We've built Techaturn to help us get together as a community to save, earn, and access credit. Join us today and discover how you can grow your savings while helping others.
So, firstly, I want to qualify that Bitcoin is still an experiment at the earliest stages. And whatever fundamental utility or use case that you might think Bitcoin has, the price or the value of a Bitcoin is still probably 80% driven by sentiment, speculation, trading, as opposed to its utility as a currency. It's just not mature. And when you have such a small volume, and I think, what's the market cap now? 700 billion or something? I'm not sure. It's easy to move markets, let's say, illiquid markets. Whereas if you look at, let's say, the financial markets of 100 trillion, it's very hard to distort, perhaps, the currency value. So that's just to qualify that whatever I say next about the use case or the utility of Bitcoin, we are not there yet, and I think it will take time, and it is still a highly risky asset. But why do I hold one Bitcoin each for each of my children college education fund? Why, that's what's my belief. Why haven't I put it in a US treasuries or something, and putting aside the riba aspect, even from a return perspective? If you go way back, probably in the 19th century, when the pound sterling was the sort of reserve currency of the world, a lot of currencies were backed by gold, the gold standard. And then what happens is you want to finance a war, you maybe break the gold standard for a while, but then you try to get back to the gold standard. And this anchors money into something tangible in the real world. And I'm still working on this explanation of the link with nature, right? I still feel Islam is synchronous with nature and the physical world and the real world, as well as the spiritual, the principles and guidance. And so if you use money as a means to exchange value, assets in the real world, goods and services in the real world, I think you support a better sort of commercial and economic environment for people. When you start to separate money, and this is a long way to answer your question on government money, when you start to separate money from some form of accountability to the real world, i.e., as a central bank, I can create money, credit money, as it were, money backed by debt, as opposed to money backed by gold, I lose this governance and accountability mechanism where by printing money, I can spend it on things that I think are good, whether it's war or destabilizing other countries, or good things and bad things, or even pumping money into the economy. You sort of create distortions, and I think what we're seeing right now is a culmination of a mechanism that was unleashed when the US kind of broke the gold standard. That's a sort of turning point where you start, without the accountability of money, you can create money. If you look at inflation, You know, if you look, I think in 1971, the average house in the US was maybe like 2 times a person's salary. Now it's sort of 6 times a person's median salary and so on. So if you don't have this physical, earthly backing to money that is either energy or physical resources, you create this artificial environment where money's created. And then once it's created, it doesn't necessarily go to the right people. You can accumulate financial wealth. Poor people, low income people tend to hold their wealth in cash. Rich people, high income people tend to own their wealth in assets. Assets benefit from inflation. Cash is debased or loses its value by inflation. So you get this massive inequality that we're seeing now. Global debt to GDP is 350%. That money's never going to be paid back. And so printing money, I feel like we're at this confluence. And going back to Murad's question on BRICS and US, etc., emerging market countries have a lot of assets. Africa is rich in commodities. The Gulf is rich in oil, and we'll put aside renewable. There's gold. So maybe by moving to asset-backed finance, asset-backed currency, we can start to unwind a bit of this crazy leverage, this debt addiction that we have created, where you buy things you don't need with money you don't have. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Shireen. I'm sorry, but you know.
No, that was a good segue actually. And you brought up a thing, a concept that's very interesting. You said money should be linked to something in nature, and hence the asset-backed aspect of it. And so the audience must be thinking, you know, how is Bitcoin, digital money, linked to something in nature? And I know there's an argument behind that around electricity. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, sure. So look, nature isn't just green trees and blue water. Nature for me is the law of physics. You know, to do anything in this world, you kind of need energy. Oil is a highly efficient form of energy. How was oil created? It was sunlight, you know, onto plants, and then plants, you know, decomposing, and fossil fuels, and you know, the energy has come from somewhere. Energy is not created from nothing. So that's the physical, the natural world. That energy isn't necessarily created or destroyed; it's only transformed. Now, whether you transform that into something physical that you can touch, or a form of energy that you can use to power a car, it's just a different form of energy, but it's still the natural world. So just to qualify, my definition of nature, you know, is more about physics. You know, the world that we live in, because that's a consequence of the natural world. Now, Bitcoin in particular, and so this only applies to coins that are not pre-mined or pre-created. You have to invest energy in this purest sense to get a coin. Your energy also serves a useful purpose. There is a network, that security of the network, maintenance of the network, adding data to the network, all takes energy. So whether my network is a piece of pen and paper and there's somebody writing stuff down, or it's a digital network and I have to inject work in the form of energy and buying computers and infrastructure, it's still backed by work or energy, and work you define in joules and so on and so forth. Once you have this constraint of the natural world, you cannot have infinite creation. And this also goes a bit to riba and stuff, you know, money on money or infinite money creation. You're not creating value from nothing in the natural world. So why in the monetary world can we create something from nothing? So I think and I'm not, a scholar and scholars, they need to bring together the younger scholars with the hadith and the sunnah, this concept of nature, energy, Bitcoin. And it's why a lot of the scholars do say that Bitcoin is a very halal form of money. So energy is required to go into Bitcoin. It's not pre-mined. It's not like somebody's created, a billion coins on their computer and he's just selling them. No. You have to invest work. Your work maintains the network. You are performing a function to society by maintaining this network. If you're performing a function to society, helping a commerce network or utility, you deserve to be rewarded in that. And that coin is a capture of your energy and work that you have put in. So that has material economic value that in theory you can exchange. But the value has become distorted from the utility, which is the speculation, the trading, and so on. But in 10 years' time, maybe the Bitcoin value will represent 100% the energy that went into it rather than the speculation. But we're not there yet.
Very cool. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying essentially is that money should be tied to some constraints that are physical and inherent in the real world. And that the fact that our money today is not constrained, we can print and create more money endlessly. This is where the problem comes in. Let's take this back, because you also mentioned now the strengths of Islamic finance in this. Let's take this back a step to when you told us a story about how when you started, they gave you a 600-page offering of a sukuk, which is basically a bond which should be 30 pages long. And you talked about that as the concept of replication. Now, expound on that a little bit. What is wrong with Islamic finance in the fiat world today, and why do we have to take it to DeFi?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to get me in a lot of trouble, but look,
More trouble for you.
I'll be diplomatic. Look, the fact is, we live globally in a fiat riba world. It's how the world functions. If you, and this is a personal view. Somebody, said, look, if there are no Islamic mortgages, can I buy a house, and so on and so forth. And so, to some degree, you're trapped in a system. And if Muslims, for example, couldn't buy houses because there weren't Sharia compliant mortgages or genuine musharaka type mortgages or ijara type mortgages, because of inflation, because we're trapped in this system, if every Muslim didn't buy a house, there would be even more poverty amongst the ummah today. You have to you have to swim just to keep up. You can't stay still in a fiat money system because your money is being debased every day, every hour. So within this context, Islamic banking, I was head of 60 banks, 45 conventional, 15 Islamic. They do a good job of trying to replicate the services that conventional banks offer. And they use existing financial structures that I would say ostensibly have a different purpose, but using a lot of legal contracts, back-to-back contracts and things, you can get to the same outcome as a debt-based financing like the Sukuk. So, in my time, I looked at over 400 billion of Sukuk instruments. 95% of them were replicating bonds. So I can speak authoritatively with that. I've been there when I had hair. I had to read all this documentation. So I've done it from the ground up. I looked at the fatwas. I spoke to scholars. And it's clear that in many instances there was a disconnect. Now, the Islamic banking sector is worth about 3 trillion. Does it do anything that's new to your average bank? Probably not. You get credit cards, you get loans, you get house finance. So, and I understand that sector, that 3 trillion sector, as a foundation. It's a success. It has introduced the concept of Islamic finance. It has introduced the community to Islamic finance. You have to start from somewhere, but I see it as a journey from A to Z. What I care about is the intention or the niyyah of the parties. Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? If you say that, okay, this is where we are and we stop, then I have a kind of, let's say, problem or a discomfort with that. If you're saying that from this foundation, from this 3 trillion foundation, we're going to build more startups, businesses, institutions that encourages Muslims to invest in the real world economy, to benefit from the real world economy, own stocks, own equities, own businesses, finance assets, own commodities, real world stuff, then, if you're taking the ummah on that journey, then I'm with you. And I completely accept compromise. You have to start somewhere. If you come out of the door and say, oh, everything's haram, then you just don't get anywhere and you hold people back. We have to work with the system. You mentioned government-backed currency. I also had this argument from a scholar. If the government doesn't back it, it's not halal. The government isn't a consequence of nature. The government is a consequence of people. But we operate within a regulated environment. And if legal tender says the US dollar or the pound is your currency, well, then you have to accept it and you have to obey the law of the land. But within that law, can we still create new systems that work together with banks, offer alternatives? I think we can. I think blockchain is a huge enabler for the first time in hundreds of years that you can bring, again, I'm a fan of cliches, power back to the people. If you give people the tools through DeFi, through blockchain, through Web3, through wallets, through digital assets, that I can engage, the three of us can engage in commerce, that I can invest in your business purely using tokenized equity and blockchain with a smart contract settling everything. So I don't need to worry about you stealing my money. I get my equity the moment the money is released, etc. It's hugely empowering. You turn the community, you turn your citizens into an economic force, as opposed to funneling it all into these centralized institutions that may or may not have their own agendas, may or may not be halal. But so technology, DeFi, fintech, venture, all this stuff, I think there's an opportunity here. And I think we're lucky to be around at this point in history, that the last 5 years and the next 10 or 15, maybe we can create complementary systems and people then can choose. I don't force people. You choose.
Yeah, actually, you made a very good point, brother. What I want to understand is, like, we have a status quo, as you know, where money is still, dollar, for example, is the king of the currency, and majority of the West actually are also looking at the weaponization of the dollars, so they're feeling a little bit threatened with their own, printing of their own currency. When you print, as you mentioned, when you overprint a dollar, it's automatic, it's instantly impacting the Lebanese economy, the Turkish economy. These people are, heavily, relying on the dollar actually, and they feel affected right away. So if you see an emergence of, I would say, adoption of this, I would say, complementary asset class, if we may call it like that, like the cryptocurrency, do you think that will come from developed nation, or you might see it being more adapted with the people who do have asset, as you mentioned, and they will maybe benefit more than the West itself or a developed nation in country like Africa? So if you have the chance to actually even, and I don't agree with le coup d'etat, like they call it in Africa. If you had a chance to spend like 10 minutes with Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Traoré, they call him, from Burkina Faso, who's sitting on the largest gold reserve in the world, but being one of the poorest nation in the world still, and give him an advice on how to diversify the economy and his currency, which is still the franc CFA, like they call it. What would you tell him, and what would you say to those guys?
Sure. Look, King Dollar is not going anywhere soon. De-dollarization, it's happening, but it's a bit exaggerated. The US is still the most dynamic economy in the world, and is backed by the most advanced military in the world, etc., etc. So if you're a distressed country like Lebanon, Zimbabwe, Argentina, or whatever, I think in Argentina, actually, one of the president frontrunners is talking about using Bitcoin as a reserve. It's still, the dollar still offers you immense stability. The BRICS nations, they don't really have a lot in common, except they want to reclaim their sovereignty, and that's not necessarily a very constructive partnership. You go to Burkina Faso, and look, the dollar is also very political, and politics matters. So if you're a resource-rich nation, I would just say, look, create a national blockchain, create a national blockchain register, a register on the blockchain of national assets, tokenize everything. And then let's see who from around the world will start buying and trading your assets with zero intermediation. Right? Now, you still need the physical world to carry that gold, to ship that gold, to keep it secure, to keep it safe, still needs force. Unfortunately, in this world, force and violence do still matter. Because you in the physical world, but in a peaceful world, making the illiquid liquid is a hugely empowering force, a monetary force for your country. So rather than holding dollars or being told not to hold dollars, I can hold my self-custody wallet. I can hold my dollar stable coins. I can hold my euro stable coins. I can have some gold tokens. I can have some copper tokens. I can have some cobalt, lithium tokens, whatever. Or oil. Oil is oil tokens, right? I can go and buy my coffee for a 0.0001 gram of a gold token. But you don't carry gold to the shop. But the moment you make it liquid on a blockchain, you can reclaim a bit your monetary sovereignty. You don't have to get rid of the dollar. No, just let the people choose. Competition, free markets. Is it going to be the dollar? Is it going to be Bitcoin? Is it going to be euro? Is it going to be gold token? Offer everything to your people and let them decide.
I think you should start flying in all those countries, because I think you're going to have a lot of work going on in the next few years.
This is a fascinating proposition. Lots of people have, debated, can we use the Bitcoin as a reserve currency? That is not enough liquidity. What can we use as a replacement for the dollar? Because there's not enough liquidity. Why the dollar will not go away is because there's just not enough money that can sustain the world today besides the dollar. And what you're proposing, which is very cool, is to say, well, all of the assets in the world, if you tokenize them, suddenly there is enough liquidity, right? Suddenly there's like a choice of money that we get to use, and that is backed by something that has constraints so that we cannot keep making more of it. And now you have enough liquidity to replace the dollar, because guess what? You can choose from the gold tokens, you can choose from the, uranium tokens, things like that. That is an absolutely mind-blowing and fascinating proposition. I know in our previous conversations, you are consulting, and as well, Marhaba, you guys are doing some work in this front. Share with us whatever you're comfortable sharing. How does it actually work, what you're proposing? How do you go about, say, tokenizing an asset and then making it a form of money?
Sure. So look, Marhaba was created by the founder Nakib as a crypto fluent savvy Muslim that didn't have halal guidance, let's say, to participate in that economy. And if you asked me 2 years ago when he started, was Islamic crypto even a thing? Didn't really know the answer necessarily. And then the second question is, even if it is a thing, do these Muslims even have money? Are they even using blockchain, etc.? And what's interesting about Marhaba's journey from zero, I think currently they're running at 200,000 downloads, App Store, Apple, Android, etc., which shows you that there's a demand because the Marhaba wallet is restrictive. You can only see halal stuff in the wallet, whereas MetaMask, Trust Wallet, you can see anything. So the only reason you touch the wallet that makes your life harder is because in some way it makes it easier. So that's the Marhaba wallet. And then what was astounding, and all of this stuff is on chain, is that in the 12 months to March 30, and most recently, it's about $2 billion of stablecoin transaction flows in that community. So that tells you that the Muslim community, now these are non-custodial wallets, to be very clear, it's not our money, but it shows that halal sensitive people in crypto are doing things, and how do we serve them? And Marhaba is a chain agnostic, because we believe, and our Sharia guidance gives us the fact that blockchains are a tool. It's how you use it that matters. You can use Ethereum network for good things and bad things, halal things and haram things. So Marhaba is chain agnostic, and we build on any ecosystem. But the idea of having a super app where gold, silver, Bitcoin, gray doesn't really change that much. But speaking to real estate companies, speaking to sukuk companies, speaking to commodities mining companies about tokenizing. So tokenization still requires the law of the land. You still have something physical. It's all very well and good me creating this fancy token. If it's not legally backed by a warehouse full of gold. So, for example, the Marhaba's gold partner is Ainsley Bullion in Australia. 50 years old, they have a mine, they have audited reserves, gold reserves, they've got a ledger. So you know that your token is backed. So you still need the real world legal environment to catch up with tokenization. And that's happening because I used to be, in my old world, I used to do securitization analysis for Moody's. So I know the law, I know how it works. It's quite easy to do. The legal infrastructure exists. So that uranium mine, that reserve that you talked about, somebody needs to do an audit that people trust. That audit then becomes on the ledger with identifiers, and then that's locked away in a vault, and it's only the tokens that are out there. So the process nowadays is quite straightforward. There's lots of people tokenizing real world assets. There was a study by BCG that said by 2030, at the low end, they say, I think it's 13 trillion of real world assets, RWAs, will be tokenized. And at the high end, they said 60 trillion by 2030. Now, where you are in that range, but it's coming. I think within 5 to 10 years, everything will be on chain. So Marhaba works with anybody that has regulated or audited tokenized assets. Sharia guys look over, validate, tell us it's okay, give us a clearance and certificate, and then we can list it in the ecosystem. So the idea is that Muslims should be able to, shouldn't feel restricted from participating in this new economic world, the future of finance, as I call it, just because there's a huge friction, halal, haram, etc. But there's still a lot of division as to what is halal and haram, etc. But we have scholars. We just actually, we a third party audit. I'm not sure it's public yet, so I won't say the name. But we just got an independent audit from a third party Sharia firm around one of our latest products that will certify independent, because you want independent audits from a governance standpoint around these types of things.
That is very
Amazing.
interesting. It's very prescient because I think in a couple of months ago we were in Singapore and I was talking to my cousin who is not a blockchain crypto person at all. But he's a very intelligent man, and he, reads a lot, and he's very well versed in financial matters. And I was talking to him. I was like, there's a move towards de-dollarization. There is great inflation everywhere in the world, and in Singapore, where I'm from, you can see this. It's crazy. It used to cost us $10 to take a taxi from the airport to downtown. It costs us $30 now in the span of 6 months. By the way, huge inflation in many things. And I was like, this is why Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is a potential solution. And of course, he doesn't believe in Bitcoin at all. So he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. However, I'm putting my money in asset-based currencies. And I was like, what do you mean? So he was saying, I put my money in currencies of countries where they have lots of reserves of some asset. So I know that their money cannot depreciate at the same rate because at the very minimum, they can always balance, the trade balance with their assets. So I'm wondering now, after your genius light bulb moment, should a country then just tokenize its assets and use it as a reserve currency? Is that a thing? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, our friend from Burkina Faso, right? The good thing about commodities, they are liquid. There's a spot price, there's a futures price. The commodities markets are so well developed, they would make fantastic currencies. They're very liquid, market making, the entire infrastructure is there. And look, it's still priced in dollars, but while the dollar may be depreciating, your physical asset, whether it's uranium, copper, etc., will index you to inflation. So now the thing is, commodities can be very volatile. And because commodities, similar to even Bitcoin, the value may not be linked to its fundamental utility. So if somebody wants, I saw an article, I think 9 months ago, that JP Morgan had the biggest short ever on gold, right? So you can still manipulate the market because you have this non-asset backed currency called the dollar. I can borrow $1 trillion and short the market of gold-backed commodities. I then buy all your gold for cheap with my fiat money, and then later on, I've got all the gold. So the fiat money even creates a massive distortion in commodities markets. So you can't do it with a view that next week my taxi ride from the airport, I can afford it if it jumps to $60 because I've got my gold-backed token. Because if somebody has shorted the gold market, etc., well, then actually that taxi may be even more expensive than you think. But if you go over the long term, 5 years, 10 years, etc., these distortions will not persist. So it's more as a longer term security, longer term savings, etc. And as a nation state, most politicians are elected on 4 or 5 year terms. So they are very vulnerable to the short term attraction of fiat, because the consequence of inflation will hit my country after I've left office. but it might hit my children. So short-term politics and fiat money are very bad bedfellows. Now, it's interesting, if you have a monarchy who looks over generations, or if you have a particular family that dominates a particular Asian country, nation state, who thinks in terms of generations, these are nation states who can play the long game. And they can say, look, I'll still sell in dollars, but let me start selling gold, silver, copper, oil, etc. And in the long term, they will come out tops. But your cousin is playing the long game, and so he's correct to play the long game. But in the short term, look, I'm holding gold, uranium, and oil, and have I done super well out of it? Actually, no. Oil, yes, but my gold is bouncing around. So there's still distortion. So it's a 5-year. Don't tell people to put all their savings in commodities tomorrow, because it could still be very volatile. So it needs to be part of your portfolio diversification, etc.
Okay, just a disclaimer that this is not investment advice. We're absolutely having a theoretical conversation about how we see the financial world developing over time. So do not put your money in anything after listening to this, just to go along your usual ways.
Yeah, a question that I like to always ask some of our guests. You know, there's two type of people that are really bullish in the crypto blockchain ecosystem. The people of a well-developed nation who have an interest into more freedom, more decentralization, more this is mine, and with the like of failing banks and everything, they're starting thinking that, hey, there's something wrong, and and the people of the have not, I would say, nation, namely Africa and some Southeast Asian nation, where they're rushing into that. And that's the first time, I think, in my life that I see those two groups kind of joining in the same, I would say, same vision. So can you maybe share on that, and why is it that a Kenyan guy from a village will go and join these things? Because of the need, of course, because the remittance need most of the time is because he's receiving money from people from back home, and you will have to find hack in order to get this very cheap way of receiving his money through digital currency. Okay, and sometimes they leapfrog. They don't want to hear about bank anymore, those guys. So I like to hear about those people who try to say, hey, we want to help the M bank. They don't want bank anymore. Hollywoodly. They have M-Pesa. They want to pay the bill, and they want to use some. And the bank is like is something they don't want to touch. But you see where I'm coming from. Like the have very developed nation, and there are very few, by the way, who are like into like we want to take control back to our ownership of our own asset, money, whatever. And then the very, very less fortunate who are jumping into this at a very faster pace than the developed world.
Look, the union of these two disparate communities is just, it's dissatisfaction, right? The developed guys are dissatisfied with the system as it stands, and there's a bit more of a revolutionary or seditious element initially, but it's going mainstream, I would say, as people see the impact of inflation and so on. But going back to what I said before about a startup being survival for people, for the people in these unbanked countries, the lack of an effective, low-cost, high-volume financial system is a massive barrier to commerce, growth, trade, etc. And so they're coming at it from a different angle, where they don't even have the choice of a banking infrastructure. Now, is, a Western bank going to go into the rural parts of Zimbabwe or Nigeria and start building banks and so on? You don't need it because, as you say, M-Pesa has leapfrogged. So that old world infrastructure is no longer necessary. And mature systems have that legacy infrastructure. So there's something you come across a lot in all of my stuff, whether it's, healthcare or money, is conflict of interest. Who sets the agenda, and in what circumstances do they profit or gain? If in every aspect of your life in business you sort of look, what is the agenda of the person, etc. So if you look at the banking system, the monetary system, they make extraordinary amounts of money from the system as it is, and they have branches, telephone banking, all the rest of it. How much money are they going to make out of a person who only has $100 of deposits, etc.? So they're not bankable. The profitability of these guys with respect to the infrastructure doesn't stack up from a shareholder standpoint. Banks serve shareholders, and rightly so. They serve the people who gave them money. There's nothing wrong with that. Profits, shareholders are absolutely halal. But the use case for rural banking is pretty low. Here you have a blockchain. Nobody has to pay for it. I mean, you have gas fees, but can you imagine if you had built a worldwide network like SWIFT? How much money it would cost to build, operate, and maintain that? Here, there's a free network that's maintained by the community, started by entrepreneurs, started by founders, and even has a self-sustaining mechanism in the form of mining rewards. So you get paid to maintain the network. And even somebody in the deepest, darkest, quietest rural thing, unconnected, can do their part to maintain the network. They can be part of that. And you can use as a remittance seeker or a trader, you can use this free network. And again, I ignore the marginal gas fees, but by free I mean I didn't have to build it. I have to pay to use it, but I didn't build it. Somebody else, the IT maintenance in banks is billions and billions of dollars, right? But somebody else does it. So on the other side, these communities, somebody's given them on a plate free infrastructure. They didn't have to build. I pay to use it. I only pay 0.05% as opposed to 3%, 4%. I send it instantly. So it's an amazing use case. We mentioned product market fit. This is a perfect product market fit for that community. It solves a pain point that the existing system wasn't interested in solving or couldn't solve due to the cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, this is a perfect time for me to plug my company, Tekedo, because this is exactly as you said. We insurance companies don't go into the villages because it costs too much for them to service, and they are running off of the banking infrastructure to begin with. So there's no way for them to go into the rural areas because there's no banks. So it is just natural that we build an insurance company that is cooperative, where the cost of capital becomes next to nothing because it's people insuring one another. And this is how you include the world. This is true financial inclusion. And this is only available and possible through the blockchain and DeFi networks, as you said, something which is there and largely free that we didn't have to build. And we pay, just whatever is normal as a use. And this is how you bring in the world, I guess.
Yes, I just want to add up one more thing actually. In terms of adoption, and in particular, when we look at Bitcoin and everything, I was going over some news where the Oman, the country, has revealed trillions or I don't know, many millions of investment into the mining of Bitcoin. They were doing it, I wouldn't say secretly, but they were doing in the back in the background. And then today they reveal. Do you see a lot of nations revealing the strategy on the mining of the Bitcoin? I heard about Nepal secretly also mining Bitcoin with the energy that they have. What is this trend, and is it something that we will see happening more and more? And
Look,
because it's becoming, yeah, they started with the young people having few rigs, few computer nodes, and that was kind of profitable for them to do it. Now it's becoming very expensive for people to mine. But we see like now nation mining. So I want to have you
yeah,
thought
so
on that.
look, I think this is a consequence of two ideas. One, especially in the Gulf, we're all pegged to the dollar. And the Gulf doesn't have any monetary sovereignty in that regard because of oil, and oil is priced in dollars. And it makes sense to be pegged to the dollar. But there's some very smart people, and this is a potential hedge. Doesn't, as a relative expense, doesn't maybe cost me much, but even if there's a 1% chance or a 5% chance that Bitcoin could be a future reserve asset. And remember, one important thing about Bitcoin is its neutrality. Bitcoin is apolitical. Every currency in the world has politics attached. Do I really want to give up dollars for Chinese renminbi or yuan? No way, right? I mean, I still prefer the dollar 100 times, or rubles or rupees, right? So there's no choice really. Every currency is political and Bitcoin is not. So that's one thing. As a neutral asset, apolitical, that has appeal. As a potential hedge, longer term, 10, 20 years, who knows, may have appeal. But the other thing unique to or favoring Gulf states is that they are energy producers. Bitcoin is a function of energy. Now, there's a lot of waste gas, waste energy stuff that happens in Nepal. Maybe it's off-peak energy. Contrary to popular belief, Bitcoin actually helps renewables by having a guaranteed customer for your off-peak demand. It's the best customer you could ever have. And you can switch it off in 1 hour. When everybody's turning on their AC, you can switch off your Bitcoin mining. So as an off-peak swing consumer of electricity that gives you income, there's nothing else like it in the world. It makes 150% economic sense. And the curse against green and all the rest of it, a lot of that is nonsense. So the Gulf states have energy and excess energy, and they're net capital exporters. So there's a lot of thing about the Gulf states which makes mining quite suited for this region.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your thought on that.
I'm going to give you the last word. What is the main takeaway somebody should have after listening to this podcast? And then tell us where they can find you and follow you to hear more about your thoughts.
Sure. Look, it's a mathematical certainty that we are now in an inflationary world. It's not my opinion. It's not anybody's opinion. It's happening. If you're someone who keeps your money in cash, you will find it depreciating in value at a more accelerated rate than before. We had zero interest rates before, 1%, 2%, but now things are getting out of hand. So you don't have to be into Bitcoin or crypto, just real assets. Everybody understands real estate. So even though you can't buy a house, maybe you buy a share of tokenized income generating real estate, prime real estate. So if you're very conservative, real estate, conservative through tokenization, fractional ownership is a good angle. If you're more bullish and more aggressive, Bitcoin at the other end, and stuff in the middle. But just be cautious. I mean, in terms of crypto, as a store of value, Bitcoin is in a league of its own. It's decentralized. Others are different. You have utility coins, that serve a different purpose. But as a store of value, so depending on where the audience is on that spectrum of conservatism, all of you make sure you go into real world assets. If you're conservative, real estate, ideally through tokenization if you can. Then uranium, gold, whatever you want to do more, still real world in the middle. Then you can go into the risk spectrum with your money that you can afford to lose bucket, into stuff like Ethereum and Bitcoin. But you have to have your own risk appetite. But be aware of inflation and think about assets, tokenization, decentralized finance as empowering mechanisms to get you there.
Very cool. And how can one reach out to you or follow you? Where can we find you?
I mean, LinkedIn at Khalid Howladar.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. And again, keep up the good work. It's always a pleasure following you, hearing from you.